Well, Sasha, let's start off. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, gosh, where do I start? I am born and raised in Boston, lived in Chicago for 6 years and relocated back home to Boston. Fun fact, a month before COVID. So I like to consider myself a trendsetter in that way. But started off in recruitment about 15 years ago in staffing. Prior to that, I was a mental health counselor and a substance abuse counselor in a max security prison, and spent some time working in psychiatric care before, again, finding recruitment. The common denominator for me has always been people and the psychology behind what makes folks tick. And like I said, fell into recruiting and have been, I've done both executive search and then have been in-house for several years. Spent the last 10 years in high tech, high growth. Now I'm at ActiveCampaign. I oversee global talent acquisition, including early in career talent operations, which includes coordination, sourcing, and then full cycle recruitment as well.
That's awesome. Well, that was quite a career change for you, but I guess it all makes sense. It's aligned with, your purpose and what you're trying to do, which ultimately is help people. So that's awesome. So now you're at ActiveCampaign. The company has grown quite a bit since you've been there. Can you tell me, I guess, a little bit about the company? What do you guys do? How many employees do you have? Just general background.
Yeah. So ActiveCampaign, we are about a little under 1,000 employees now worldwide. When I started 6 years ago, we were about 120 employees, solely in Chicago, rather. Now we have hubs in Dublin, Ireland, Sydney, Australia, Brazil, Costa Rica. We just actually opened that entity this week, which is super exciting. ActiveCampaign, we are the world's most positively reviewed marketing automation platform in the world. Like I said, we have 180,000 customers globally in 170 countries. So we focus on helping small teams power big businesses. So that ranges from small business to upwards of mid-market, et cetera. But our bread and butter has historically been on the small business side. We are industry agnostic. So, the industries that we support kind of run the gamut with a heavy emphasis on consulting. So super interesting, a lot of optionality, which has afforded us a lot of success through some turbulent market conditions, in the past. We're in the SaaS space. We have been, like I said, been growing kind of tremendously over the 6 years that I've been here. Which has been a really wild, exciting ride.
Yeah, no kidding. 120 to close to 1,000 people is pretty crazy in a 6-year span. When you were brought on at 120 people, what did the talent acquisition team look like at that point in time?
Yeah, so talent acquisition, we were leveraging a lot of staffing firms. There was one in-house recruitment partner. So I was brought in to oversee and build out the greater talent function. At that time, when I immediately started, I brought in a couple folks that I had worked with previously. I worked for a company before this that had some unfortunate circumstances, laid off quite a bit of folks. And so I took some of those folks with me. So had a talent acquisition manager partner on the tech side. And then continue to grow the team out to build a sourcing coordination model that I've leveraged as my farming system, right, to grow and groom recruitment internally. So again, when I started, there was one recruiter and built the team out from there. Today, the entirety of the talent function globally is around 15 people.
Oh, wow. And is that all reporting up into you?
Yes. Yep.
Got it. And what's the makeup of that team today between those 15 folks?
So I have two full cycle TA managers, one overseeing the tech and product side, the other oversees go-to-market G&A recruitment, right? And I have an early in career recruiting manager as well who oversees the internship programs, the rotational programs, all of the different types of programs that are under the early in career umbrella, apprenticeships, et cetera. And then I have a talent operations team. That includes our sourcers, coordinators, and then more traditional talent ops. Their role is to really focus on maximizing the work that the recruitment team is doing. I've only had an ops function for a year and a half, and it's been a game changer for me, honestly. I attribute that to the team that I have in place, honestly. But it's a really strong addition to full cycle recruitment for sure.
I've been hearing a lot more about that lately with, some of the faster growing companies as them building out this talent ops function. How did you know you were at the point in which you needed to put people in that type of role, and how did you know where to start?
Yeah, so basically, I had done a ton of research and had a ton of exploratory conversations with folks in the market that, or in my network rather, that I know had a lot of success in building ops functions from ground up. And so had a lot of data points in terms of, when is the right time? And frankly, what I determined was there doesn't need to be a right time per se. I think it's all about, ultimately the goals of the organization, and the desire to professionalize a lot of systems and processes. And, what I realized in taking a big step back is I was building out kind of a sheet of, what are all the components of talent operations that the full cycle recruitment team is doing now? Owning systems, reporting, talent brands, you name it, right? And as we continue to grow as an organization, there are things that were becoming more and more critical, such as data integrity, right? And so we had aggressive hiring needs, and ultimately, I felt like in order for us to get to that next phase, we needed to really focus in on operationalizing what we were doing in order to get more out of the recruitment partners. So in theory, it's great. It's a great opportunity for the recruitment partners at first to really dip their toes in different parts of the function, getting exposure to the branding side and reporting and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we really want them to focus on being people, right? And focusing on the candidate experience and the full candidate journey, right? So, it was a little bit daunting building the talent ops function because there are a lot of different ways to approach building it out, and it is a more innovative function and up and coming. But I was really fortunate to find the senior manager that I have on the team today, and she has been, like I said, a game changer for sure.
And I think to your point, it then allows your recruitment partners to really focus on where their skills are best utilized, which is working with people and performing, the activities that are necessary to connect with the best candidates versus focusing on things like data integrity, systems, back-end admin types of processes. Yeah. And so, I see the talent ops function very similar to a rev ops function within a business, which I'm, sure you guys have as well. I know the go-to-market side of the company. And it just helps everybody across the revenue org be much more efficient and much more productive, without scaling the headcount of all the individual contributors on that go-to-market team. And so I think similarly on the talent ops side, building out, once you get to a certain size, building out that talent ops function allows all the people you already have in those recruitment roles to be a lot more efficient and be spending their time where they're adding the most value for the business. And then that means as a company, you don't have to go hire a bunch more TA people just because you have all these things to do. You've got these specialists that are really optimizing the whole system and ensuring that the people that you have, are operating at, full capacity, which I think is really, really important, especially now and going forward as companies look to just be, as efficient, capitally efficient as they can possibly be, lean as they can possibly be, high emphasis on profitability. Those things don't just apply to the revenue org, they also apply to the talent function as well.
For sure. Absolutely. And, again, there are things, even data cleanliness, right? And consistency, like, the data in is only, the data coming out is only as good as the data going in, right? So somebody to like obsess over systems, the tech stack, even like owning partnerships with the different, like, vendors that we work with, and vendor management and all that stuff. It's been just tremendous, honestly. So I highly recommend it. If it's right, for the stage in which a company's at. I never knew what I was missing until I started the function.
So you guys have obviously, grown a lot over the 6 years you've been there. I'm curious if you could break down, or if you recognize like there were very different phases of growth, like maybe going from 120 to 200 to 250 was very different from going from 500 to 750. Did you see any differences at the different, phases the company was at when it comes to recruiting?
Even from a branding perspective, when I started, nobody knew who we were. And even in Chicago, nobody knew of us. In fact, I didn't even know who we were until I got introduced to the CEO. And I was like, oh, this company's got something really special, right? Like, this is interesting. We weren't getting much inbound at all, right? To fast forward to, today, right? Or even at 500 employees, we were getting, folks from competitors applying directly, HubSpot, Salesforce, et cetera, right? So from a branding perspective, for sure. And obviously that was due to, the recruitment team being very intentional with their outreach and generating demand, building that brand, et cetera. And then from a process and procedure perspective, there's just generally, it's been an evolution as it relates to the sophistication, and just there's a more obvious need for the balance of professionalization and speed, right? So, of course, as you grow and scale, take in more funding and all this stuff, like, you have to, again, you have to focus on that professionalization side. I've noticed also, as we continue to elevate the state of the executive leadership team, we're bringing people in that have a really much more experience on the recruiting side, and coming in with stronger point of views, and really helping to just generally think about, what is needed to, because the truth is a lot of our leadership team hasn't gone from, or not a lot of them, but some of them haven't gone beyond, 500, et cetera. So like, bringing those new executives in, and really diversifying the level of experience of the leadership team helps to gain some buy-in for recruitment as it relates to how we go about enforcing some processes. And then even from a evaluation perspective, like a candidate, evaluation, the bar continues to raise as you grow, right? And frankly, the people that were to get you from 0 to 100 may not be the right candidates to get you from 100 to 5, et cetera, et cetera. So we've introduced more, like I said, more sophistication, and specifically on the evaluation front, we recently introduced what we're calling a high grade interviewer, as a more objective way to go about assessing for the behaviors that we know have driven a lot of success internally. It also is a way to like mitigate bias, and really intentionally focus on or remove the risk of assessing for qualities that frankly don't predict on the job success. So again, just over time, even how we've opened new regions. The first region that we went into, or I should say, when we opened Australia, our first international presence, I mean, scrappy is an understatement for how we entered that market, and we did it well, right? But now it's a completely different beast in terms of how we enter a market with, again, more intentionality and sophistication, and expertise is just has been really cool to watch.
That's awesome. I'm curious, you mentioned about how, some people that maybe got you from, were right for the stage of 0 to 100 employees, but maybe not for 100 to 200 and so on and so forth. How do you create that feedback loop with your managers and executive leadership to know, when is the time to go look for new people to bring in to get us to this next phase of the business? And then B, know what to look for in these new people because you don't have people like them today on the team.
So to be honest with you, a lot of this relies on, one, how you build your talent function to represent, or your talent partner function to represent a more proactive, strategic partnership, right? So in order to even get to have those conversations, to have those conversations that you're talking about, there needs to be a trust and credibility as it relates to the recruitment partner. Otherwise, they will not be pulled into conversations related to, for instance, succession planning, right? Or talent gap analysis. Like, I think the more involved the talent partners can be in some of those conversations, the more we can get ahead in terms of how we're proactively recruiting, especially on the passive talent side, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it starts with how your talent partners show up, Josh. I think a lot of talent functions, unfortunately, have the reputation of being order takers or super reactive. To me, that's the difference between a recruiter and a talent acquisition partner. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I think
it does. My follow up to that would be how do you get that talent acquisition partner to build that trust and to be involved earlier and to create that credibility for the talent function so they become part of those conversations more naturally.
It starts with hiring the right people, right? And setting expectations up front around just like for me in particular, I very much believe that recruitment, and this is like obvious as a recruiting leader, but like recruitment should have a seat at the table, right? If you want to focus on your talent strategy. And, when I hire for recruiters, or when I did early on, even hiring for recruitment coordinators, giving them exposure and pulling them into conversations that they may not have ever been exposed to in the past with hiring managers and executives, right? And really giving them the space to fail, right? I think unfortunately, a lot of recruiters or a lot of hiring managers and the like treat the recruitment function, as the support function they are, right? And that's, hey, I have a role, can you fill it, right? I have been very intentional with hiring people that I know have specific qualities, and some of those qualities include like the ability to push back, right? And I think the more, like the other thing I'm very intentional about is as soon as a recruiting partner starts, they don't own a rec for at least 3 to 4 weeks, so they can really get a sense for the company, the inner workings of the company, how the different teams operate, who the hiring managers are. And that way, when they hit the ground running, they have a better sense for what's going to work. And then they have more confidence to push back on certain hiring decisions, right? So look, at the end of the day, Josh, they can be as great as they want to be on the strategic side, but the proof is in the pudding, right? So obviously they have to make a few good hires. And by good hires, I mean they are folks that are culture carriers. They're driving top performance internally. They have strong tenure. They're getting promoted, right? And then the more that recruiter, owns recs for the hiring manager, the more credibility they have. And they end up coming to me saying, hey, can I work with so-and-so again? I want to work with that recruiter again, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it's just like really creating the space for your recruiters to show up as strategic business partners. That's how we set the tone right off the bat when I started.
Yep. And that makes a lot of sense. I actually see a lot of parallels, I think, in the marketing function in how it relates to the overall like go-to-market function in a business. What I see a lot of times is You'll have sales and functions like sales, maybe customer success, and they think they need something for marketing, and it's like, throw it over the fence. Marketing, we need this, this, and this, and marketing's like, okay, we'll work on this for you, turn it around, ship it back to you. But I think to your point, the point you bring up about talent acquisition partners needing to be able to push back, I see a lot of parallels with really good marketing leaders need to push back and ask the right questions and seek to understand, okay, I hear you have something you want to solve. Let's really unpack that from a strategic standpoint, because marketing shouldn't just be like an order taker for another part of the business. They should be working together to figure out ultimately, what are you trying to solve here? And what outcome do you desire, and how can we help you work to that? And I think it's very similar, at least what I'm hearing from you is, in a lot of companies, all parts of the org will say, I've got a job I need to fill, toss it over to the recruiter, get them to fill the job. But it requires somebody, with the right business acumen, and the right discipline to be able to push back and say, hey, let's take a step back. Let's, talk through this, because maybe the hiring manager doesn't even realize they need something completely different than what they're telling the recruiter to go do.
Absolutely.
And a strategic partner can help them figure that out.
Absolutely. It's also curiosity. I think the big thing you just hit on was like a business acumen and a general understanding of, like I said, the inner workings of an organization, having that enterprise mindset, right? I always say, like, one of the things I love about internal TA is that we are incentivized to make the right hires, right? The right hires that ultimately, stay, again, drive the business forward, all this stuff. We are not, we're not incentivized to put a butt in a seat, and that's a really powerful thing.
Yep. And you've been on both sides of that, right? Because you were on the staffing side where it's, all about placing candidates, placing them quickly, and that directly ties into revenue. But internally, it also ties to revenue when you do hire somebody, but it's more about, the lifetime value of that employee for the business and getting the person that's going to be there for a while, is going to be productive while they're there. And so it's a little bit of a different mentality, because there's no handoff and you wipe your hands clean and you move on to the next rec. It's you're living in the business every single day. And part of building the credibility with the hiring managers is finding those people.
Absolutely.
So
the other thing that I'm really proud of on this team is like the success around like proactively sourcing and hiring directly versus partnering with agencies. And with all due respect, like, there's a time and a place, but like when I started, we were spending, a lot of money on staffing firms, right? So being able to bring that in-house and making it really repeatable is a reflection on the recruiter effectiveness. And that I'm really proud of as well.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I think a lot of companies, might always still need staffing partners to help supplement what they're doing internally. But there does become a point in time as a business where you have to build that sourcing discipline, that proactive outreach, pipeline generation. And it kind of goes back to earlier in the conversation, you were mentioning the early stages of ActiveCampaign when you joined at 120 people versus where you're at now. Is when you came in, people maybe didn't necessarily know who you were when you had an open job. And so, I'm wondering, do you feel like that was one of the biggest things you built in early in the talent acquisition function, is that sense of proactive recruitment? And then, then as you scale, you make that repeatable. And then when you start getting the compounding effects of now people do know who you are, it all starts to work. And that really is what allows you to hire as many people as you need to hire in such a short period of time. And if you never really built that up front, you'd probably still be relying on those staffing partners and be paying a boatload of money to scale at the way you guys have been able to scale.
For sure. The other thing I would say that I set the tone for early on is just a emphasis on the qualitative side of TA, right? I think a lot of TA leaders really put a heavier emphasis on the quantitative side, which you need a balance, of course, right? Like if no one's making hires, then frankly, you're not doing your job, and you're highly exposed, right? But the qualitative side, for me, is where we've really been able to focus, which again I think has yielded, stronger relationships and partnerships with the hiring managers, and that is, because at the end of the day, you can hire 100 people, but if 80 of them leave, like, does it really matter? Right. So
Yep.
I've really been able to, and again, with the help of the ops team, I've really been able to lean into the stuff that for me is really, really meaningful.
Yep, that's great. And one of the things I was looking at is on the ActiveCampaign careers page yesterday, and I was reading about the AC way. So maybe you could tell me a little bit more about, generally what is the AC way? And it seemed like, based on the description on your website, you've really built a hiring process around that concept to bring people that align with that into the business. So maybe you could share some details on that as well.
The AC way is inclusive of our company values and the behaviors that inform those values. So essentially, the behaviors that really actualize the values, because every company has value, not every company, but a lot of companies have values. And sometimes those values can be misinterpreted, right? And so we've been very intentional and transparent with, okay, well, we know we have these values that we live and breathe by, but like, what does that actually mean here, right? So what we've done is we've built a framework it's essentially a hiring, development, and performance framework that bleeds through the entirety of the employee journey. So it starts with, okay, let's be intentional with how we assess people right off the bat against these behaviors. So we know, we're with more of that standardization and structure up front, we're driving a higher correlation between an interview and on-the-job success. When they get in, let's help them to capitalize and tap into some of those behaviors by furthering, developing them in those areas. And then on the performance side, it's heavily the performance reviews, annual reviews, et cetera, are centered around those behaviors. And again, how those behaviors play out will vary, from team to team. For instance, the talent acquisition team, our customers are candidates and hiring managers or stakeholders, right? We don't touch the end user. So how we're thinking about some of this from a customer perspective is a little bit unique, but in theory, if you peel back the onion, it's all the same. So the framework was built from a number of conversations with folks that have been really, really successful in the business. They've been there for many years. They've seen non-traditional, non-linear career paths internally. They're product experts. They exemplify the AC way. And so through having those conversations and working hand in hand with the CEO, that's how this kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, that's awesome, because you hear a lot about companies saying, interview for your core values, but nobody really talks about how do you do that, right? So I think a lot of people probably ask questions to just see, does the candidate believe in this type of value, or they align with this type of value? But that doesn't really give you, of course, what's a candidate going to say? Yes. Right. So, is it really like a behavioral interview structure then you've implemented to ask questions, to assess for those behaviors that then align with the values?
Yep. So what we did was we identified department nominated, high performing individuals at all different levels and regions throughout the company, and trained them on these behaviors and how to assess against these behaviors through specific question sets and optimal responses. That group of folks, they're called high graders, and they're introduced at a certain level for roles, and they're an objective interviewer. So they're department agnostic, right? So they shouldn't be in the same chain of command as the role, and they're going in with less bias in terms of this person's not going to be working directly for them, right? So they're purely going in with the mindset of, I want to make sure this person is going to be successful here, right? And again, a lot of this is centered around transparency and just, hey, candidate, like, this is how we roll. These are our expectations. For one, like, does this make sense for you? Do you fit into this, or not fit in, but can you get down with some of this, right? Does some of this fit into how you operate? But more so, does this excite you? And do you feel like the way we operate is going to help to elevate you in your career. So it's mutually beneficial, right? So at the end of the day, we all want the same goal. We want people to join and stay and do good work, right?
I like the concept of bringing somebody in who's not a hiring manager and also isn't another individual contributor on the team that they'll be working with, because you get this completely different perspective. You know, you could take this really objective approach with somebody like that versus a hiring manager or an individual contributor who might have their own personal incentives or biases, you know, because this person's going to be working side by side with them.
And honestly, you know, this type of interview framework is only as good as you train the interviewers. I mean, it's a stressful interview for candidates because of the heavy behavioral component. So I think, you know, it takes like a deep understanding of what these behaviors actually mean and how to assess for them, and then like extracting information, reading between the lines, connecting the dots, and then, you know, really kind of being able to craft a really meaningful assessment. It's hard. And, you know, frankly, we're only less than a year in. So, you know, we're still iterating and identifying areas in which we can strengthen the program and make it more meaningful. But we don't have enough data to look back yet and say, you know, this has been successful and here's how or why. So, you know, a lot of companies have tried to implement something similar and have failed. I think a lot of companies that have this type of interviewer will provide, or the interviewer will have vetoing power. If you look at a company like Amazon, they have the bar raiser program. The bar raisers do hold vetoing power. So there's a lot of different iterations of it out there. But for us, this is what we found, you know, might work best.
And how are you going about training the interviewers?
In-house, homegrown training module in partnership with the L&D team. So myself and our CEO lead the training for that group. And again, in partnership with L&D to ensure that, you know, the way in which folks are obtaining the information, you know, is how it should be and is inclusive of different learning styles. And you know, beyond that, it's a really look, at the end of the day, Josh, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, recruiting is so much of an art, you know? So I think a lot of times, you know, we can train on behavioral based interviewing, but the reality is there's not enough predictability, right, in the interview process. So a lot of it comes through time and interviewing and role playing, right?
Yep.
Because you know, again, the nature of our product are people, and people aren't predictable. So I think it's, you know, repetition.
I mean, baseball background, you need at bats, right? You need swings at the plate, and you know, I've talked with some other folks about that. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in training hiring managers or the, you know, high graders that you guys have, and trying to get them up to speed on being a great interviewer is, in practice, like they might only do this once a year, right? And so like the real life at bats might not be there versus, you know, let's say a talent acquisition partner that's talking to candidates, multiple candidates every single day. A hiring manager or a high grader isn't going to have necessarily that real world exposure. And so that's where the training and consistent reinforcement and the role playing, like you said, really comes into play to get them to where they need to be. So when they get into the, you know, real life scenario with a candidate, they're well equipped because they're not getting all those shots throughout the year.
Right. And how do we create multipliers, right? Like the people that we know are really, really skilled interviewers and have seen a lot of success in hiring here. How do we repeat some of that and leverage their expertise and training other folks? You know, so I think, you know, there's no magic bullet. But I think it's just like identifying the people that that are the culture carriers per se. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not trying to maintain our culture. We want to diversify and expand upon it. But, you know, the people that really directionally understand what works here can test some of that. And look, I'm a realist. I mean, the truth is, I said this earlier, I'm going to say it again, the correlation between an interview and on the job success is low, right? And that's because we're spending a couple hours with one person. That's it, a couple hours, right? And each interviewer is spending 30 minutes to 45 minutes with them only. So that's just like the nature of it. And then the subjectivity, the inherent biases, et cetera, et cetera. So by, again, introducing more structure and standardization we're increasing the correlation just a little bit,
Yeah.
which is great. That's a huge win,
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, look, a good hire is not somebody that also, like, of course, you want them to come in and be able to do the job they're asked to do right now.
Yeah.
But as a scaling organization, you also have to be able to look for the qualities and behaviors that help you somewhat predict how they will perform as the company grows, and will they be able to grow, and adapt with that. And that creates even more unpredictability, because most interview processes are really built around this point in time right now. But that gives you such a small window into what the candidate is actually capable of.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a really big challenge.
Yeah, and something, a skill or behavior or competency, whatever, that's super, super valuable at ActiveCampaign is being a utility player and being able to kind of switch lanes, if you will. And some of the people that have been the most successful here started in, let's say, customer support, 8 years ago, and now are at the C-level, right? And so I think a good hire may be defined differently in every company, but the reality is, like, to your point, like we ultimately all have the same goal, but how that plays out will vary. But yeah, that utility player mindset, I think, is like just invaluable. And I want to be clear too, like the high grade portion of the interview is carries a lot of weight, but at the end of the day, like, we need the person to actually do the job. So of course there's a heavy emphasis on testing for the functional depth as well. And those people are, that those assessments are coming from people that are like practitioners per se, or subject matter experts. They're testing for the core competencies of the role, or role competencies.
Yeah, 100%. Look, like you said, you only have, let's say, a few hours of a candidate's time at most, right? Especially when you're competing against other organizations. At the end of the day, like, time to hire matters for the candidate experience and whether or not you'll be able to, get the best candidate on board. So you have to figure out ways that you can, as efficiently as possible, gather as many data points about that candidate to give you a higher chance of success at predicting whether or not they'll be a great hire for the organization. And that's all what it comes down to.
And you just nailed it. I mean, that was a huge impetus for the framework like this, was how can we drive more predictability, right? And I think, like, once we have enough data, we're going to look back to identify any patterns throughout, some of these interviews, in order to see, like, some of that, the predictability actually come to life? Like, has it worked? Like, we just don't know yet. But we are a culture of iteration. And so, again, we push this framework out imperfectly, and we are continuing to chip away and adjust as we need to. But it's been a really interesting, like I said, evolution of, like, just how we go about assessing talent here.
And what was in the mantra you mentioned earlier in the call with your customers? There's a statement about helping small businesses, something big businesses, something like big businesses.
No, we help small teams power big businesses. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, and I think, at least in talking to you, I feel like, that's obviously what you're trying to help with your customers, but I feel like you really embrace that philosophy internally as a business as well, as you guys have grown from, a smaller company to a much, much bigger company. But I think you embrace a lot of the things that a small company needs to do really well if it needs to scale, right? Creating repeatability, that's super important. Iterating on things and doing it quickly, ensuring that you're bringing people in that are adaptable. And so, really, as I'm talking to you, and you mentioned how talent acquisition has to be a strategic part of the business, it really feels like you are working in lockstep with the rest of the organization, and are aligned with the message that you're delivering to your customers as well. And so to me, that's really cool. And I think a sign of a business that has really good alignment, which is 100% critical if you want to grow from 100 people to 1,000 people in 6 years.
Oh, yeah, no. And you summed it up perfectly. I'll say the other thing I'm really fortunate is I have a lot of strong tenure on the TA team as well. So, they've continued to build upon that credibility, and it's only getting, stronger. But look, at the end of the day, we are hyper obsessed with customer experience. And that is how we've built our platform. It's intuitive, it's easy to use, and I think, like, as we think about how we can translate some of that on the recruitment side, it's, how do we go about differentiating ourselves from a talent branding perspective, right? And how do we create a memorable experience for folks that, best case, let's say they don't get a job here, they're gonna run and tell their friends, hey, you should look at ActiveCampaign.
Yeah, and look, you said it right in the introduction when I asked you about ActiveCampaign. I can't remember exactly the phrasing you used, but one of the first things you said when describing it was something along the lines of, like, we're the most highly rated or top rated.
Yep.
And so clearly customer experience and how your customers view and are satisfied with the platform is something that is very important across the entire business and part of, the DNA of the company. And I think that carries over into the talent function in the way that, your candidates become your customers in some kind of way, right? And you want them to view your talent function equally as highly as your customers view the business.
Absolutely.
Because whether they're a candidate or a customer of you today or tomorrow, your brand, your reputation is everything.
Not to mention, a lot of the folks that we hire, our candidates that we bring in, become our hiring managers and even more of a stakeholder,
Yeah.
So, yes. And to reiterate, like, what I said earlier, we are the most positively reviewed marketing automation platform in the world. And, what we look at, even in recruitment, is candidate satisfaction, is CSAT, right? Because again, it all kind of goes together. And I think in an effort to really keep that theme going as part of who we are at our core, we have to think about how that correlates to what we do, right? And that's why we have a talent recruitment or coordination team, right? And their job is to really, again, obsess over the experience that the candidate's having. So it's all kind of pieced up, but at the end of the day, everyone works together to create that seamless experience that favors speed and quality.
Yep, love it. Well, Sasha, this was awesome. I learned so much. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and I'm sure all of our viewers are going to get a lot of value from this episode.
Josh, thank you for having me. It was so fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks.